Local performance group Dogs of Heaven staged a spectacular show. The Late Show went to visit Hulme and retell through the place and the people something of the unique history of this extraordinary estate.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Hulme, Manchester, Great Britain. So, it is my immense honor to say to all you slum dwellers, your prayers have been answered. Welcome to paradise.
Outside, they had forgotten that these were not just homes of concrete bones or no-go zones. There was an old Jamaican woman who would cook dinner for my friend Glenn every Sunday on William Kent. Then there was Yvonne, who said she didn't know she lived in a ghetto till she read it in the news. Condemned. We were condemned before these buildings fell, before one piece of dust rose from the demolition. We were condemned before they saw the sunset lick this grey brick on a summer's night. Right? Outside, they had forgotten that these were not just homes of concrete bones or no-go zones.
People regard the buildings around them as their environment, and you expect some part of your life to be stable. And I think people, and quite justifiably, expect buildings to be the stable element of their lives. People will come and go, but the buildings will stay. And in Hulme, it's the other way around. You've got people that have been here 60, 70, 80 years, and they're in their third cycle of buildings, just about to come up.
The history of Hulme is indeed a history dominated by demolition. This is its second major clearance program in 30 years. The first, in the 1950s and 60s, saw the destruction of Victorian dwellings, which had come to epitomise slum housing. Their demolition fractured the community, leaving few of the original tenants behind.
Marvellous community.
All your old neighbours, they were really friends. Not just neighbours, but really friends. You know, they was there. When you needed them, they was there. They helped you.
And if they needed you, you helped them.
Yeah.
They moved everybody all over, right?
And Forthwood and Shaw.
Well, they all moved out, haven't they?
Yeah. It's only us two stayed in Hulme. Of the two families, of our two families.
By the early 1960s, Hulme had become one of the biggest urban redevelopments in Europe. Left with a vast area of empty land and faced with the need to rehouse large numbers of people quickly, the council were encouraged by government policies at the time to commission architecture that used industrialised building techniques.
It does, of course, mean factory-built houses, but factory-built houses can be just as good as production line cars. And I think we're going to move to this. The only thing is to make sure that they're done by good architects and well landscaped, and that will get over any danger of monotony.
Wanting to avoid the problems associated with tower blocks, Manchester, along with many other city councils, chose a new, much praised type of architecture called deck access. A series of housing blocks linked by streets in the sky, it aimed to recreate the old communities. Hulme became one of the biggest deck access estates in Britain. A large number of low-rise dwellings were built with a spectacular vision, with 4 huge crescents at its heart. The crescents were designed by the architects Lewis Walmsley and Hugh Wilson in 1965, creating 924 new homes and costing just over £4 million to build. Significantly, they were named after famous British architects, and they were modelled on the Regency terraces of Bath. At the time, they were seen as state-of-the-art social housing.
The thinking behind the crescents was based on Le Corbusier's notions, the idea that the landscape would flow uninterrupted and the buildings would float above that, with people not down on the ground in congested, smoke-ridden atmospheres, but living high near the sun, lots of fresh air. That was the real intent behind them. I was in Manchester when they were going up. They looked absolutely magnificent. And I think that at the time, everybody felt that they were, you know, New World, utopia stuff.
Completed in 1971, the Crescents were initially hailed as an architectural success story. However, the first tenants moving into the blocks encountered problems so fundamental that it called into question the whole design.
The Crescents failed because they were badly built. Their amenity standards in terms of heating and insulation, etc., were very, very bad. People couldn't afford to run very expensive electrical heating systems, and cold, damp, condensation, bronchitis, pneumonia, etc. set in. They were dangerous. A kid fell off one of the balconies and died very early on. And above all, there's a rabbit warren of escape routes for social misbehaviour to breed within. They are the worst form of housing to police.
When we first saw the state of the mills, the height of them, my God, it was frightening. I do remember feeling frightened of such monstrosities. It's the electricity that none of us had realised, you know, that it was only warm air heating. And that the cost of it, for what you were getting only on the ground floor of your masonette and nothing in the bedrooms, was that bad. I mean, people had to cut back on food and all kinds of things, you know.
Just 4 years after it was completed, this new utopian vision was already a notorious failure, and tenants were demanding to be rehoused. Faced with the situation where they couldn't afford demolition, in 1975 the council took the decision to move families off the Crescents and to replace them with all adult households. And so a second phase in the life of these buildings began.
The council didn't have the money or probably the face to demolish them 4 years after they were built. So they said, right, we'll find another use. We'll move the families out and we'll replace the families with students and all adult households, young single homeless people. A lot of people that were moved out of the mental institutions closing down during the 80s were rehoused in Hulme as well. And out of that grew a community that was very different from your traditional family-based council estate community.
You got a sort of a mixture of people that I'd never bumped into in my life before, and found them a lot more supportive, a lot more understanding, but also I just found I learnt a lot more. You know, you sort of come to a place like this where you're bumping into sort of 50-odd different ways of living as opposed to 2 or 3 stereotypes, and you can learn from people and pick up on ideas of other ways of doing things. Because Hulme has concentrated a lot of people that wanted to find another way of living in the world because they weren't happy with what was outside, the logical step on from that is to then find a way of actually making that sustainable. And I certainly think that some of the most innovative ideas for sort of cultural activity or businesses, or even down to the bits of art, music, those sorts of things, a lot of those ideas have come out of Hulme. And they've made their way into the mainstream culture of the city. Factory Records started in Hulme. They started in the club just outside my flat here.
Through the late 70s and the 80s, the music, art and subculture to emerge from Hulme created its own niche in the mythology of youth culture. The Crescents experienced another vision as a new Bohemia and became a magnet for young people.
People came to Hulme to live on the edge, I think, to create their own worlds, really, to create their own environments. I mean, they did their own music. They could practice in their flats. There was no one that was going to complain. They released their own records on indie labels, and all their mates that lived in the Crescents and lived in other parts of Hulme could come and see them. It was a self-sufficient little world. I think that when you look at musicians and artists like Edward Barton, you can quite clearly see in Edward Barton, you know, a guy that has created his own world within a world, a flat full of wood, and kids dummies and teddy bears, and going into that flat actually reflected the sort of anarchy and free spirit of Hume.
Listen to Edward, Barton, do you good. Listen to Edward.
This is my anti-Hume room. Sometimes I don't want to live in Hume. Sometimes I have disagreements with it, get disgruntled, and then I come in here and pretend I'm in Canada, to be very simple about it. It's probably slightly more complicated than that, but it is Canada occasionally.
There's some fantastic murals on the sides of walls, and some people have done some incredible things with paint and posters. I suppose that was a sign of people staking some claim on the Crescent, saying that they owned it, whatever state it was in. They were going to make a go of it.
It actually worked because it became a magnet, like all good architecture in a way, all architecture. If it can become a magnet for a certain way of life, then people are attracted to it who will share a common community of interest. And if you can find the architectural clothing to fit your lifestyle, it will become acceptable. And Hume, ironically, became acceptable.
Although the Crescents had become acceptable to the new community, life was not easy. The isolation of the estate and the economic decline of the area also attracted problems of escalating crime. For Manchester City Council, the Crescents had come to symbolise the problems of inner city deprivation. By 1989, they set out to find the funds to demolish the Crescents. Despite a fight by tenants to keep one of the blocks, the City Council remained unmoved.
They have to go. They're the most awful, awful housing disasters, partly because the blocks themselves are in a very poor condition. And when we've done our own assessments of what it would cost to refurbish them and retain them, it would actually be considerably cheaper to knock them down and start again. And secondly, just because in terms of the overall stigma of Hume, and it's one of its biggest problems is the stigma of the area, there is no question at all but that the Crescent blocks, the 4 Crescent housing blocks, are the major symbol of what's wrong with the area.
In 1991, Hume, regarded as one of the worst examples of inner city deprivation, was awarded £37.5 million from the government's City Challenge scheme towards redevelopment of the area. Finally, plans for the demolition of the Crescents and surrounding lower decks could begin.
Forward planning cheats the present day. History recoils, repeats. Another utopian dream screams, eats itself away as the bullish bulldozers break the legs of these sick, derelict, docile sculptures. The echoes of crackling concrete kiss the ground, spewing streams of bent steel. And for the last few years, this has been the anarchists' playground, a grey blank slate to draw the fate of their world upon. It's been a 24/7 student heaven, along with cockroaches. It's theory-ridden, a place where even dogs are in heaven. Under the Crescent's moon, rest in peace, Hume, with all your stormed roses.
People that have lived here for a long time have gone through several experiments and been the victims of those experiments, and the people that have lived here for a shorter time, like myself, have learned from those people that have been around for a while. And I think we're getting together to make sure that experiments like Hume in the 60s don't ever happen again, not in Hume, not anywhere else.
By the eve of demolition in 1993, conditions were so appalling that the Crescents had become dramatically depopulated. Many of the tenants in Hulme are now housed in surrounding lower blocks. The checkered history of the estate has created a unique mix of people, young, permanent residents and travellers who are determined to stay together as a community through this redevelopment. At a recent planning weekend, they came together to discuss their vision for the new Hulme. Ideas ranged from the unconventional, a site for travellers, creating a happening zone and respecting ley lines, to the more conventional, reinstating the street patterns of old Hulme and creating a civic centre. When it came to actual designs for homes, different groups of tenants wanted quite different styles.
We wanted a garden, right? And a lot of the people wanted a garden. I don't think there's anybody who didn't want a garden, was there?
There's quite a few people don't want them. No, the Maloney's over there.
There wasn't quite a few, there was only a few of them.
Yeah.
But if they keep to what they planned, it should be great,
Great.
I hope.
Ironically, those who had found that the Crescent suited their lifestyles have decided to give deck access architecture a second chance. In conjunction with architects, they have designed a 6-storey building with walkways around a central courtyard. It includes spaces for recording studios, performance, and many of the small businesses that have developed in Hulme. The hope is that it will recreate the spirit of the Crescents.
We've actually learnt ways of living in these places, and we have proved that there are things worth keeping in these places. So what we're doing with our scheme is making it, I think, as resolute an urban statement and as resolute a statement of what Hulme was like. Here's the good bits, as we've been able, and we've filtered out the bad bits.
Working with people who lived on the decks and appreciated the qualities that they had, and they did have qualities, they understand, I think, the value of what the modernists were saying about light and air and space. And I think that's been fully understood by people who've inhabited the decks over the last 20 years. They see there is a communal dimension to the decks if they're properly built. And that's what they want, because urban life is basically communal.
While some visions of the future now exist, the demolition of the Crescents still causes resentment.
I'm still really angry that we're having to do this, that out of, just the Crescents, when I first moved here, there were 600 flats occupied by, more people than I could ever know, with more information, more things to offer than I will ever know about. As it is, there's going to be 75 flats in that redevelopment there, and I don't know what the rest of it's going to be like.
The raising of the Crescents became a symbolic event staged by the local performance group Dogs of Heaven, commissioned by Hulme Regeneration.
I felt that there had to be some acknowledgement of what those blocks meant to people, those blocks meant to the people who lived in them and who lived around them and who shared the adversity and the difficulty.
I mean, I moved in and the tide was flowing out, but the sun was still shining, and now it's like, the sun's going down a bit. I mean, it's going to rise again. I don't doubt that.
The history of the Hulme housing estate.